Hey, book lovers. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Mmm, Dorian Gray. Such a classic.
Yeah, it's a bit intimidating, right? Like, is it really worth the time?
Yeah.
That's what we're figuring out today.
Good plan. Got to make those reading hours count.
Absolutely. So to help us decide, we've got a critic's review, which is already pretty positive, 4 out of 5 stars.
Okay, not bad at all.
But then there are tons of Goodreads opinions, and honestly, they're all over the place. You can tell this book really gets under people's skin.
I can see that. Strong reactions are always interesting, though, right?
Totally. And then to add to the mystery, we found some very specific video instructions online, almost like this book was meant to be talked about on YouTube. Makes you wonder why.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued. Visual interpretations, strong opinions. Sounds like we're in for quite a ride.
No kidding. Where do we even start? Maybe with that critic's review. They gave it 4 stars, so it can't be all bad.
4 stars is definitely a solid recommendation. But like you said, there are some nuances to explore. We should probably lay out the basics first.
Yeah, for anyone who needs a refresher.
Exactly. So, the picture of Dorian Gray is set in Victorian London, and it all revolves around, well, Dorian Gray. He's this young, handsome guy who gets caught up with Lord Henry Wotton, a charismatic but kind of cynical character.
The classic bad influence trope.
Yeah, you could say that. Lord Henry introduces Dorian to this world of pleasure and, how do they put it?
Hedonism.
Yeah, hedonism. Basically, living for the moment, indulging in everything, not really worrying about consequences.
Sounds a bit dangerous, to be honest. Like, is that really a good life philosophy?
Well, that's the question the book explores, right? Dorian gets obsessed with staying young and beautiful forever, and he ends up making this almost Faustian bargain.
Like a deal with the devil?
Kind of. But instead of the devil, it's his portrait that ages and shows the effects of his, well, not so good deeds. He stays young, but the portrait reflects the ugliness of his actions.
Whoa. Okay, that's dark. Like, actually dark. So it's a horror story.
Not exactly. It has those Gothic elements for sure, but it's also a social commentary. Wilde was critiquing the hypocrisy of Victorian society, especially their obsession with appearances.
So it's got depth. More than just a creepy tale. But what about the writing itself? Some of those Goodreads reviews mentioned it being a bit flowery, and I'll admit that can be a turnoff for me.
Ah, yes, Wilde's style. He was known for his wit and elegant prose, lots of epigrams, and those clever turns of phrase.
Epigrams.
You know those short, witty sayings that make you think, like, the only way to get rid of temptation is to yield to it? Sounds familiar.
Oh, yeah. That's Lord Henry, isn't it?
Oh.
Clever, but kind of messed up, just like you said about his character.
Exactly. It gives you a glimpse into his philosophy, which is part of what leads Dorian down this dark path.
Okay, I'm starting to see why people have such strong feelings about this book. It's more than just a story. It's like a philosophical debate wrapped in a Gothic thriller.
You got it. But hold on, we haven't even touched on those video instructions yet.
Oh, right. What's the deal with those? Why so many visual interpretations of this particular book?
Well, maybe it's because the picture of Dorian Gray is just so visually rich. Wilde's descriptions are incredibly vivid, almost cinematic.
Yeah, I can see that. The whole concept of the portrait aging instead of the person, that's pretty striking imagery.
Definitely. And don't forget the setting. Victorian London, with all its elegance and darkness, it's a world ripe for visual adaptation.
True, true. Okay, so we've got intrigue, we've got Gothic elements, we've got social commentary, and it's visually captivating. This is sounding more and more interesting by the minute, but before we go any further, I gotta know, what do you think so far? Is Dorian Gray worth reading?
Well, I'd say it definitely has potential. But there are some things to consider, like you mentioned, the pacing and those potentially outdated views.
Yeah, those are my main concerns, honestly. Like, I don't want to spend hours reading a book that feels like a slog, or worse, makes me feel icky with its values.
I hear you. No one wants that. But here's the thing. Even with those valid concerns, the picture of Dorian Gray offers something unique. It's like a time capsule, you know? You get to step into Victorian London, see the world through Wilde's eyes.
Okay, that does sound kind of cool, like a historical peek behind the curtain.
Exactly. And you encounter these characters who are grappling with things that are still relevant today, like the pressure to be beautiful, the consequences of bad choices, the whole struggle between good and evil.
I guess those are pretty timeless themes. But let's be real. Some of those Goodreads reviewers were not holding back on the criticism. What were some of their main gripes?
Well, some found the language a bit dense, which, fair enough, Wilde can be pretty wordy, and a few said the plot was slow, which, again, it's not exactly an action-packed thriller.
So not for the impatient reader, then.
Probably not. But for those who enjoy a more introspective, philosophical kind of story, it can be really rewarding. And, we have to talk about those problematic views, especially the stuff about women.
Yeah, that was a red flag for me,
Yeah.
for sure.
I get it. And look, there's no denying that some of what's in the book reflects the prejudices of that time, especially stuff that Lord Henry says. But I think Wilde was actually using him to satirize those very prejudices. Like he's almost a caricature of the shallow upper-class mindset.
Oh, interesting. So it's more about exposing those views than endorsing them.
Exactly. And by showing how Lord Henry's influence corrupts Dorian, Wilde is basically warning us about the danger of those kinds of beliefs.
Okay, I'm seeing it in a new light now. It's like a cautionary tale wrapped in a pretty package.
You could say that. And speaking of pretty packages, it's fascinating how many people compare Dorian Gray to modern influencer culture.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, think about it. Dorian is obsessed with his image, with staying young and beautiful forever. He wants to experience everything, indulge in every pleasure, and he doesn't care about the consequences. Sounds kind of familiar, right?
Whoa, yeah, it totally does. Like, he's the OG influencer,
Right.
living for the gam, even though Instagram didn't exist back then.
Huh. Exactly. And the thing is, Dorian's story shows us the dark side of that kind of lifestyle. He might look perfect on the outside, but inside, he's rotting away.
So it's like a warning about the emptiness of chasing superficial things.
Exactly. It's about finding true beauty, not just the kind that fades with time.
Deep stuff. Okay, I gotta admit, you're making me want to read this book. But I'm still curious about those video instructions. What makes Dorian Gray so ripe for visual interpretation?
Well, first of all, it's incredibly visual in its language. Wilde uses these vivid descriptions. You can practically see the scenes playing out in your head.
Yeah, and the whole idea of the portrait changing, that's pretty cinematic in itself.
Right. And then there are the themes, which are universal and timeless. Good versus evil, beauty and decay, the consequences of our actions. These are things that resonate with people on a visual level.
Plus, Victorian London just looks cool on screen, all those fancy clothes and gloomy streets.
Huh? True, true.
Okay, you've convinced me. Dorian Gray is going on my reading list. But if someone is still on the fence, what's the one thing you'd tell them to keep in mind while reading it?
Pay attention to the details. Wilde is a master of symbolism, so every little thing has meaning.
Ooh, I love that. It's like a treasure hunt for hidden meanings.
Exactly. So don't rush through it. Savor the language, look for those deeper layers, and you'll get so much more out of the experience.
Great advice. Okay, folks. Sounds like The Picture of Dorian Gray is a must-read for anyone who enjoys a thought-provoking, visually rich, and maybe even a little bit disturbing story.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, and it's not like a simple good versus evil thing, right? It's more nuanced than that.
Way more. It's about the gray areas, the compromises we make, the ways we fool ourselves.
It makes you think, would I be any different from Dorian, given the chance? Like, would I be tempted by that kind of power?
That's the question, isn't it? And honestly, I think that's why Dorian Gray has resonated for so long. It forces us to look in the mirror, so to speak.
Yeah, not just at Dorian, but at ourselves. Okay, so to sum it all up, it sounds like we're giving The Picture of Dorian Gray a thumbs up.
Definitely a thumbs up, but with the caveat that it's not for everyone.
Right, like we talked about. The pacing might not be for everyone, and some of the views can be a bit, well,
Outdated.
yeah, outdated is one way to put it. But if you go into it knowing that, and you're willing to engage with those tougher aspects, there's a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. And visually, it's a feast. So many adaptations, from movies to plays, even operas.
I'm actually kind of surprised it hasn't been turned into a big Broadway musical yet. Seems like perfect material for that.
Now, there's an idea. Someone get on that quick.
Huh. Seriously. But hey, if you, dear listener, have already experienced Dorian Gray in any way form, we want to know. Head to our website, leave a comment, tell us your thoughts. Would you be swayed by Lord Henry? Would you make the same choices as Dorian?
And if you haven't read it yet, but you're intrigued, well, what are you waiting for? Go get yourself a copy.
Exactly. And then come back and tell us all about it. This is the kind of book that sparks serious discussion, and we are here for it. So until next time, happy reading, happy watching, happy everything, and thanks for joining us on another deep dive.